the next thing? So far we have focused on understanding only about summarizing a single variable. But most of the time we are interested in understanding whether two variables are associated with each other. When I talk about association, I am not mentioning about causality. Association is not always causality. We are not talking about causality here, but we are just asking questions about association between variables. So, in this module, the learning objectives are: first, we start by understanding association between two categorical variables. Here we will introduce the notion of contingency tables and how we use contingency tables to understand the association between two categorical variables. Then we move forward to understand how two numerical variables are associated with each other. Here we talk about scatter plots, the nature of this plot and how we measure the association between two numerical variables. Though the focus of this module is mainly to understand association between two categorical and association between numerical variables, we also spend some time to understand how you will talk about a relationship or an association between a categorical and a numerical variable. So, these are the learning objectives of this week. So, we start with the association between categorical variables. So, what is the main objective of this section? So, here we are going to understand about how to construct what we refer to as a two-way contingency table. We will introduce the concept of relative frequencies and use how you can use this concept of a relative frequency to determine whether there is an association between two categorical variables or not. So, let us start with an example. Now, if you look at this example, I have a market research firm which is interested in finding out whether ownership of a smartphone is associated with gender of a student. In other words, the company is interested in knowing whether more females own a smartphone while compared to males, or whether owning a smartphone is independent of the gender of a person. This is the main question. So, how do we go about answering this question? Immediately you see that when I talk about this, I have actually discussed two variables. The first variable is gender and the second variable is ownership of a smartphone. So, how have we captured this? Gender is again a categorical variable. It has two categories. I am assuming male and female. Ownership, the way I have captured the ownership of a smartphone is again through a categorical variable. Here it is a binary. If you own a phone, you say yes. If you do not own a phone, you say no. So, let us look at the data. So, if you look at the data, you can see that this is a data. What is the data? I have the data which has been collected where the variables which I am talking about are basically, you can see gender and whether they own a smartphone or not. That is the data that is collected, and this data is actually collected for 100 university students. Okay. So, what is the data? The data that is collected is a group of 100 college going children were surveyed about whether they own a smartphone or not. So, the data collected is for each student what was captured: gender and whether they owned a phone or not. So, yes, no and gender was captured. So, for example, person 1, I asked the gender, it could be a male. This person, if they owned a cell phone, it would have been yes. person 2, male, does not own a phone. Person 3 could have been a female, does not own a phone. Person 4 could have been a female, owns a phone. Person, and this is the way for 100 students we collect this data. So, the two variables here are gender. The second variable here is whether they have a smartphone or not. Yes, if they have a phone. No, if they do not have a phone. So, this is the data we have collected. The total number of observations are 100, and this is how we have collected the data. So, what are the categorical variables in this example? The first categorical variable is gender. There are two categories, and we know that gender is a nominal variable. The next categorical variable is whether you own a smartphone or no. The values this variable take are yes and no. The values gender take are male and female. Again I have two categories. Again it is a nominal variable because there is no order in this variable. Okay. Hence you can see that I need to know that what is the kind of my variable and what is the scale of measurement. Here I have both are categorical variables with nominal scales of measurement. Okay. So, now let us look at the data. Once you have the data, this is the data which I am talking about. So, here you have 100 students, and from each of these observations I copy their gender and whether they own a smartphone or not. So, what is the summary statistics I have from my data? The summary statistics I have from my data are I have 44 female students and 56 male students. Remember, we are asking 100 students the question. For every student we record what is their gender and we record whether they own a smartphone or not. This is our survey. Further, 76 students owned a smartphone and 24 did not own. So, if you look at it, what we discussed in the previous weeks was, first if I look at gender as a categorical variable, how to summarize this gender? I know 44 female and 56 male. We saw that we could summarize it using a bar chart. Again, owning a smartphone or not, ownership, yes, no, I have 76, yes, and 24, no. Again, there are two values this ownership takes, yes and no, and both of them here 44 plus 56 add up to 100, 76 plus 24 add up to 100. Okay. Now, I want to know the association between these two variables. So, I have another data which is useful to me, which says that 34 female students owned a smartphone and 42 owned a smartphone. Okay. So, this is the data which is given to us. So, the first question we ask is, how do I summarize this data? So, given this data which is in the form of this table which I have here, the question is, how do I summarize this data? I have two variables. The first variable I can write it as a gender. Now, there are two values this gender takes. I write it as a female, I write it as a male. So, this is my variable. The other variable is ownership. Now, this is a yes, this is a no, this is a yes, okay. And I have grand totals. So, if I have the grand row total, I have it here, I have a column total here. So, you can see that there were 44 female, that is what is given here, 56 male, that is what is given here. Now, when I come to ownership, 24 did not own, so my no is 24, 76 owned. So, you can see that this totals add up to 100 students. This is the first thing. I am not looking at filling in the inside table, but these are the 44 females, 56 males in my data set, 24 not owning, 76 owning. Now further so this is what I have tabulated. So this is 34 because 34 female owned a smartphone. Similarly 42 male owned a smartphone. Now how many did not own? That is easy. 10, which is 44 minus 34, and here I have 14, which is 56 minus 42. We can see 10 plus 14 adds up to 24, 34 plus 42 adds up to 76, and we can also check that 10 plus 34 add up to 44 and 14 plus 42 add up to 56. So, summarizing this data or the data given here is referred to as a two-way table, more popularly referred to as a contingency table. How do we construct a contingency table? To construct a contingency table, we look at the first variable, the levels of the first variable. In this, the first variable is gender and it has two values, female and male. So, suppose this variable takes 3 values. So, the level 1, level 2, level 3 or level m of the first variable goes into my rows. I look at my second variable. Suppose there are n values of the second variable. I have level 1, level 2, level n. I will have n columns, and what goes into the ijth column here is the number of observations of the ith variable and the jth variable together. For example, 34 is the number of female students who own a phone. So, this is how we construct what is a contingency table, and you can see that this is how we have summarized the contingency table. Now, in this example, both gender and ownership of smartphone, both of them were what we referred to as a nominal variable. There was no order in this variable. So, if I had constructed my contingency table by looking at the following, that is male, female, no, yes, it would not have made a difference because the information given is the same. The order did not matter whether I had female and male or yes or no, it would not have made a difference. So, the order in which you are stating your variables in the contingency table will not matter when both my variables are nominal in nature. Okay. Now, we will discuss how to create these contingency table using Google Sheet. Go to the data. So, this is the data which I have here. You can see that this data has 100 observations, okay, on both the variables. The variable gender is in my B column, the variable smartphone is in my C column. So, how do I create the contingency table? I choose my or I highlight my data, okay. How many observations do we have? We have 100 observations. I highlight my data. So, I go and choose the columns. The variables I seek association now are gender and ownership. I choose it. Then I go to the data tab and click on what is called pivot table. Okay, that is step 2. Go to data and click on the pivot table option. Now, in the pivot table, create pivot table. Okay, it opens the pivot table editor. In the existing sheet, I am going to, so I go to data, I click on pivot table. In the existing sheet, I am just going to give a location to my pivot table. The location I give it here, okay, and now I go to create. Okay. Under the rows tab, add the first categorical variable, which is gender. Okay. Under the columns tab, click on the second categorical variable, which is ownership of a smartphone, that is 3.2 step. Under the values tab, so I go back here, okay. Under the values tab, I click on either of the variables. So I have clicked on gender here, and I am asking it to summarize by count A, and you can see that I have what I got here is my precisely, this is the categorical or the contingency table which we just did a few minutes before. So you can see that there are 34 females who own a phone, 42 males who own a phone, 10 females do not own a phone, 14 males do not own a phone, 42 females and 56 males in my data set, and 24 do not own a phone, whereas 76 own a phone. This is what I get from my data set. So, this is the pivot table in your Google Sheet, which gives you a contingency table in Google Sheet. Okay. So, if you saw in the earlier example, we had two nominal variables. Okay. Now, what would happen if I have a ordinal variable? Now, let us look at another example here. Now, when in the earlier thing, I saw whether gender was associated with ownership of a phone. I summarized that using a contingency table. Now, I am going to look at whether income actually is associated with ownership of a phone. So, again we have the same market research firm which is interested in finding out about whether ownership of a phone, again this ownership of a smartphone is my variable here, is associated with income of an individual. Now, the income variable is again, how do we record this income variable? In this example, we have a market research firm which is interested in finding out whether ownership of a smartphone is associated with income. So, what are the two variables here? The first variable is ownership. Again, this was the variable we considered in our earlier example, but now instead of gender, I am considering income. Now, how is this income recorded? How is this income recorded? The income is recorded as high, medium or low. Okay. So, we have categorized this income into three categories, and what are the values of this income variable? It is a high, medium and low. So, this is a categorical variable where I am not actually calculating or I have not recorded the actual income, but I have actually categorized these 100 people again into whether they come from a high income group or a medium income group or a low income group. And for each of these persons, we are asking whether their income is a high income and whether they own a smartphone or not. This is how I have recorded my data. Okay. So, here if you look at this case, now what are my variable? Again the categorical variable are income, which is low, medium and high, and the second categorical variable whether you own a smartphone or not. This variable, whether you own it or not, has two categories, the yes category and the no category. It is a nominal variable, whereas the income, which has three categories, the low, medium and high, is an ordinal variable because there is an order in low, medium and high, because low income is lesser than medium income, which is lesser than high income. Okay. So, recall when you are summarizing two nominal variables, we said the order in which they appear in the table is not of any relevance. However, when you have an ordinal variable, it's good to maintain the order. What do we mean by this? Suppose I again continue with the same way, I choose income and own a smartphone. I choose these 100 observations. I go to my data. I click on pivot table. In my existing sheet, I am going to create my pivot table here. Okay. Again, under rows, I add income. Under columns, I add own a smartphone. And under values, I am just going to add on an income. You can see that this is my contingency table which I have here. But what you notice in this contingency table is, first I have a high which is highlighted here. Okay. So, let us go and look at only the contingency table. So, you can see in the contingency table, if you are looking at the order of the income, you have a high income, a low income and a medium income. Whereas the actual order is either high, medium, low or low, medium, high. That is the order in which the variable appears. So, you do not want to see a jumbled order of a variable where there is an order of the variable. One way to overcome this is to have a order, have a high, a medium and a low variable. I just coded this variable as 1, 2, 3, where 1 represents a high income, 2 represents a medium income, 3 represents a low income. So, now if I am looking at a contingency table between these two variables, again I choose the 100 observations which I need. I choose the 100 observations. I again go to data, pivot table. In the existing sheet, I am going to go and create a data pivot table here. I will just click on this. I am going to create it. Rows, I again add the income. Columns, I add whether they have a smartphone. Values, I am going to do the count again. Okay. So, now you can see and you can actually compare these two tables. The first table, my high, low and medium did not have an order, whereas in the second table, 1 represents a high income group, 2 represents a medium income group and 3 represents a low income group. So, you can see that the order is preserved in the contingency table. So, whenever you have an ordinal variable, it is recommended that the order is preserved in your contingency table. So, finally, how does my contingency table look for this? I have this data and using this data, you can see that the corresponding table corresponding to this data is, I have a high, medium, low. The order is preserved in the income. Whether they own a smartphone or not is recorded. I have 20 people who are high income, 66 who are medium, 14 who are low income. Out of these 100, 62 own a phone, 38 do not own a phone. Among the high income 20 people, 18 own a phone, 2 do not own a phone. Among the 14 low income group, 9 do not have a phone, 5 have a phone. Among the 66, I have 27 who do not own a phone and 39 who own a phone. So, at the end of this subsection, you should know how to organize bivariate categorical data into a two-way table, record the first variable and its level in 1, these could be the rows, record the second variable here, this is variable 1, variable 2, and a cell here, the ith level and the jth level tell how many of variable I and variable jth level of variable 2, variable 1 ith level and variable 2 jth level are there in this particular cell. And this is what is referred to as a contingency table. A word of caution, if the data is ordinal, maintain the order of the variable in the table.